So let's talk about how to apply quality peer-reviewed science to your day and how to optimize everything from sleep to learning, creativity, meal timing, etc. I'm going to do this in the context of my day and what I typically do. So at some point in the evening, I eat that thing that we call dinner. For me, dinner, of course, is about eating, but also about optimizing the transition to sleep. So my dinner generally is comprised of things that are going to support rest and deep sleep. And that means starchy carbohydrates. It's absolutely clear that one of the major ways that we can increase serotonin, which helps in the transition to sleep, is by ingesting starchy carbohydrates. So my dinner is carbohydrates and some protein. So maybe some chicken or fish or something like that, maybe some eggs, or sometimes just pasta or just rice and vegetables. And that's because I enjoy those foods, but also because I want to increase the amount of serotonin in my brain so that I can actually fall asleep that night. Many people who are on low carbohydrate diets struggle with falling and staying asleep. And that's because it's hard to achieve heightened levels of serotonin, which are necessary to enter sleep. I should also mention that melatonin and serotonin fall in the same pathway. They are related hormones and neuromodulators. You might ask, well, can't I just take serotonin? And indeed you can. However, many people, including myself, find that when they supplement with serotonin in the evening or at night, that can cause problems in the architecture or the structure of sleep. It can cause a lot of people, including me, to fall asleep very fast, sleep very deeply for 3 or 4 hours, and then wake up and have a terrible time falling back asleep. And that effect, at least for me, can last several days. It's really disruptive. So I don't like to supplement with anything that is directly dopamine or a precursor to dopamine at any time, or directly serotonin or a precursor to serotonin. Rather, there are other things that can enhance the transition to sleep safely, which we will talk about in a few minutes. But the evening meal consists largely of carbohydrates for that specific purpose of generating a sense of calm. And of course, carbohydrates are delicious. And because I'm doing some physical training, that's also going to replenish my glycogen stores, which is one of the primary fuel sources for moving one's muscles and moving around and doing exercise, as well as for the brain and for cognitive function. So let's talk about sleep and how to access sleep. One way to do that is to leverage the drop in temperature that's necessary to fall and stay asleep. So as I mentioned earlier, in the early parts of the day after waking, our body temperature is rising, and that continues throughout the day. And then sometime late in the afternoon, our temperature peaks, and then it starts to drop. That drop in temperature of 1 to 3 degrees is vitally important for us to be able to fall asleep easily. One way that we can decrease our transition time into sleep is to accelerate that drop in temperature. And one way to accelerate that drop in temperature, somewhat counterintuitively, is to use hot baths, hot showers, or if you have access to one, a sauna. Now, this is counterintuitive, but actually, if you are to get into a sauna or a hot shower or a hot bath and then get out, your body is going to engage particular mechanisms for cooling itself off that are going to allow you to drop your temperature more quickly and fall asleep more easily. It is absolutely true that keeping the room very dark is beneficial. The other thing is keeping the room cool. The reason keeping the room cool is useful for getting into and staying asleep is that throughout the night, there are phases of sleep where you are paralyzed, so-called REM sleep. That's a healthy paralysis, presumably so you can't act out your dreams. But there are portions of the night where you can move. And one of the more important movements that you do in the middle of the night is put your hand out or your foot out, or you take your face out from under the covers as a means to cool yourself. You're actually allowing cooling of the body through what are called AVAs, arteriovenous astomoses is the technical name, that are in the palms, the upper half of the face, and the palms of the feet. Now, there are things that one can take to enhance the transition to sleep. 3 compounds that can be very beneficial for aiding the transition to sleep, and for which there are wide safety margins, although please do check with your physician before taking anything, are specific forms of magnesium, something called apigenin and theanine. Magnesium comes in many forms. Magnesium threonate and magnesium biglycinate have transporters that allow them to cross the blood-brain barrier more readily than other forms of magnesium. And there within the brain, they promote the release of a neurotransmitter called GABA, which is an inhibitory neurotransmitter which shuts off the forebrain to some extent. It doesn't shut it off completely, but it essentially shuts down thinking, rumination, planning, and what we call executive function. So for many people, taking 300 to 400 milligrams of magnesium biglycinate or magnesium threonate 30 to 60 minutes before sleep can aid them in falling asleep. When coupled with apigenin and theanine, provide a sort of synergy or a sleep cocktail that seems to be very effective in aiding the transition to sleep. So apigenin is the substance that's found in chamomile, and 50 milligrams of apigenin taken 30 minutes before sleep can act as another way to shut off the forebrain and reduce rumination, reduce anxiety, and allow people to fall and stay asleep. And then the third compound is theanine. Theanine is a compound that can also increase GABA, but also increases activation of something called chloride channels. Chloride channels are another way in which neurons lower their levels of activity. So magnesium threonate or biglycinate, apigenin, and theanine in combination can be very effective for aiding the transition to sleep. What if you wake up in the middle of the night? This is a very common occurrence, and there are two general themes around waking up in the middle of the night that one can use tools to counteract. The first theme is if you're somebody who is tired in the evenings and you're kind of pushing yourself to stay awake. So you're going to the party or you're pushing yourself to study or work when in fact you'd like to get into bed at 8:30 or 9, and then you're falling asleep around 10:30 or 11 and waking up at 2:30 or 3 in the morning and you can't fall back asleep. Chances are that your melatonin pulse was initiated early in the night. So that melatonin pulse started probably around 8:30 or 9, but you're staying up. You're battling that melatonin. You may not like this advice, but one of the things that you can do to offset that is to simply go to bed earlier. The other thing is, many people wake up in the middle of the night because of anxiety or because they have to use the restroom. It's perfectly fine to flip on the lights, but keep the lights dim. But if you flip on those lights, try and flip them off as soon as possible and try and get back into bed. So now we've essentially traveled around the clock, so to speak, from the time where one wakes up until the time they get to sleep. I want to emphasize that although people's schedules vary, most people are doing more than 1 or 2 work bouts per day. And indeed, I'm doing more than 1 or 2 work bouts per day. I really emphasize that morning 90-minute work block because I think most people would agree that there's a portion of each day in which we need to do the hardest thing or the most important thing or the thing that demands the most of our cognitive self. I position that early in the day, and I position everything around that in order to ensure that it happens and that it happens with the highest degree of efficiency, even though that morning 90-minute work block is so vital. Of course, there's a second work block. So combined, that's just 3 hours of focused work, which may not seem like a lot. But if you were to dissect your day and kind of look at the arc and structure of your day, I'd be willing to bet that if we added up the total period of time in which you were in deep work, really focused, dedicated work, that it would probably amount to about 3 or 4 hours. And of course, throughout the day, there are other things happening. Outside of those 90-minute work blocks, I'm checking my text messages, I'm checking my email, I'm responding to various demands, I'm working and tending to life. So while I've carved boundaries around those work blocks, and I'm certain that if you do too, you will benefit from them, of course, please adapt and modify what I've described today in ways that best serve you and your schedule.